I've always known the courtroom was a den of vipers, but I never imagined I'd become one myself. My name is Harlan, Judge Harlan to those who bow and scrape before the bench. For over 2 decades, I presided over this dimly lit chamber in the heart of the crumbling old courthouse on Elm Street, a relic from the city's Gilded Age, where justice was a commodity traded like stocks. Bribes slipped under tables, witnesses bought and sold, verdicts auctioned to the highest bidder. The air hung stale and heavy, laced with the scent of aged wood polish, cheap cologne, and the underlying rot of human desperation, a miasma that clung to the skin like a shroud. Flickering fluorescent lights cast elongated shadows across the oak-paneled walls, where portraits of stern-faced judges from eras past stared down in silent condemnation, their painted eyes seeming to track every whispered deal and perjured oath as if they could sense the decay festering beneath. My own corruption ran deeper than the petty graft of my colleagues, a venom that poisoned my soul from within. It began 15 years ago, in a moment of weakness that still rises like bile in my throat, bitter and unswallowable. I was a young prosecutor then, ambitious and ravenous for the bench, but ensnared by a web of political favoritism and old money influence. Desperate, I delved into forbidden knowledge, poring over dusty tomes in forgotten libraries, seeking an unnatural edge. One rain-lashed night, beneath a blood-red moon that hung like a gaping wound in the sky, I descended into the crypt beneath an abandoned chapel on the city's outskirts. The air down there was fetid, thick with mold and the faint, echoing whispers of ancient chants that slithered through the darkness like unseen serpents. I murmured incantations from a crumbling scroll over a serpent's fang, a relic plucked from the jaws of some primordial beast. The ritual promised power, the ability to scent lies like blood in the water, to pierce the veils of deception that shrouded every courtroom. But curses, as I learned too late, come with strings attached, or in this case, coils that bind tighter with every heartbeat. The transformation was agony, a rebirth in fire and shadow that tore through me like thorns ripping flesh. My skin blistered and split, revealing scales that gleamed like polished emeralds under the crypt's pallid glow. My bones cracked and reformed with wet, grinding snaps, my senses sharpening to inhuman acuity, every sound a thunderclap, every scent a revelation of hidden rot. From that night on, I was a were-serpent, a monster cloaked in judicial robes. The gift allowed me to detect falsehoods with unnerving precision, a metallic tang in the air, a pulse in my veins that quickened with every untruth, like the throb of a festering wound. But it came with a hunger, an insatiable craving to devour deception itself. Lies weren't just words, they were sustenance, twisted energies that fed the beast within, nourishing it with their oily, writhing essence. Each full moon, or when the deceptions piled too high, like storm clouds gathering over a parched plain, heavy with unspoken thunder, my skin would itch and fissure, unleashing the horror. I'd fought it for years, suppressing the urges with iron will and secluded rituals, but the curse only grew stronger, more insistent, whispering promises of ecstasy in the devouring, its voice a sibilant hiss echoing in my skull. I'd used it sparingly at first, in the shadows, targeting the worst offenders outside the courtroom to sate the hunger without exposure. A crooked cop here, a lying informant there. Their deceptions extracted in hidden alleys, leaving them hollow shells, eyes vacant as if their souls had been sucked dry. But the courtroom was my domain, and the lies there were a banquet, tempting me constantly with their cloying sweetness. I'd twist verdicts to my advantage, accepting bribes while using my senses to ensure my own secrets remained buried in the depths. Hypocrisy? Perhaps. But in this world, survival demanded it. The beast made me untouchable, or so I thought. Today's trial was a farce from the start, a meticulously orchestrated charade that reeked of corruption from the moment the bailiff called the court to order, his voice echoing like a death knell. The defendant, a slick corporate executive named Connor Vance, stood accused of embezzling millions from his company's pension fund, leaving retirees destitute and families shattered, their dreams crumbling like dust. Vance was the epitome of white-collar villainy, impeccably tailored suit, silver hair slicked back, a perpetual smirk that said he owned the room, and everyone in it. His lawyers, a pack of high-priced sharks from a downtown firm, had greased every palm in sight, mine included, though I'd buried that bribe deep in an offshore account, telling myself it was just the cost of doing business, even as guilt coiled in my gut like a dormant snake. The courtroom was packed, the air humming with tension that pricked the skin like unseen insects. Spectators crammed into the creaking wooden benches, journalists scribbling notes, victims' families glaring daggers, and a smattering of Vance's cronies, their faces masks of feigned innocence that hid the rot beneath. The witness stand, a lonely island in the center, was occupied by Clara Wheatley, the whistle-blower, a mousy accountant with trembling hands and darting eyes, her fear palpable, like the scent of prey in the underbrush. She'd come forward with evidence of Vance's schemes, but I could already smell the rot. Her testimony had been bought off, twisted by threats or promises. The metallic tang of lies hung heavy, like ozone before a storm, making my skin prick beneath my black robes, a harbinger of the beast's awakening. I sat on my elevated throne, gavel in hand, the weight of the bench pressing into my spine like an accusation from the grave. The room's dim light filtered through grimy windows, casting everything in a jaundiced glow that turned faces into ghastly masks. My clerk droned through preliminaries, but I barely heard him over the insidious tingle spreading along my arms, like fire ants burrowing under the skin. I shifted uncomfortably, clenching my fists to hide the way my nails were beginning to elongate, sharpening into subtle claws that scraped against my palms. "Not now," I pleaded silently with the beast. "Not here." But the curse was relentless, feeding on the mounting deceptions, its coils tightening around my restraint. Vance's attorney, a weaselly man named Reginald Hale, rose with theatrical flair. Hale was a fixture in these circles, known for his silver tongue and willingness to bend ethics into pretzels, his every word laced with the subtle venom of half-truths. He paced before the witness stand, his polished shoes clicking on the scarred floorboards like the tapping of skeletal fingers. "You claim my client falsified records," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "But isn't it true you've been paid to sabotage him? That this entire testimony is a fabrication born of personal grudge?" Clara faltered, her eyes darting to Vance, then to the floor. A lie bloomed in her throat, thick and cloying, and I felt it like a pulse in my veins, a siren call to the hunger that made my mouth water with unnatural anticipation. The air grew thicker, the tang sharpening into something almost tangible, copper, bitter, irresistible, like the scent of blood drawing a predator from the shadows. My fingers clenched the bench, wood splintering faintly under my grip as fissures cracked along my arms beneath the sleeves. Sweat beaded on my forehead, not from the stuffy air, but from the internal war raging within, a battle against the thing slithering just beneath my skin. I tried to suppress it. God, how I tried. Reciting mental mantras from the ritual scroll, willing my body to hold, but Hale pressed on, layering falsehood upon falsehood, his cross-examination a masterpiece of misdirection. Each twisted fact was a drop of blood in shark-infested waters, and the beast stirred, uncoiling in my gut with a low, rumbling growl that only I could hear. The spectators leaned forward, murmurs rippling through the crowd like wind through dead leaves, carrying the faint rustle of unease. A journalist in the front row adjusted his glasses, oblivious to the storm brewing, the air thickening with an electric dread. Vance lounged in his seat, that smirk widening, confident in his web of deceit. But I could see beyond the facade now, my enhanced senses peeling back layers like flaying skin. Vance's secrets unfurled before me like smoke from a funeral pyre. Not just embezzlement, but murders covered up, a rival executive, suicide in his penthouse, a whistleblower vanished in a car accident, lives ruined in boardrooms stained with metaphorical blood, deals sealed with handshakes over graves that whispered accusations in the night. The hunger roared to life, a gnawing void that demanded satisfaction, its claws raking my insides. It wasn't enough to know. I had to feed, to consume the lies and leave truth's barren skeleton behind, exposed and shivering in the cold light. My vision blurred at the edges, the room tilting as a transformation seized me, a tidal wave of pain that drowned all reason. It started with a low hiss escaping my lips, barely audible over the courtroom murmur, a serpentine whisper that sent a chill down my own spine, like the breath of something long buried stirring to life. I gripped the gavel tighter, but it slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that echoed like breaking bones. Heads turned, confusion flickering across faces like shadows in candlelight. Beneath my robes, my skin sloughed off in ragged sheets, peeling away like old wallpaper to reveal glistening emerald scales that pulsed with an otherworldly sheen. pain lanced through me, exquisite and terrible, as my jaw unhinged, elongating into a serpentine maw, lined with venomous fangs that dripped with iridescent poison, each drop hissing as it hit the wood. The room blurred further as my eyes slit into vertical pupils, piercing the veil of illusion with predatory clarity. Color sharpened to unnatural vibrancy, the red of a spectator's tie like fresh blood spilling from a wound, the pale fear on faces like moonlight on fresh graves, illuminating the terror etched in every line. I could see them all now, the hidden truths coiling in every soul, writhing like nests of vipers ready to strike. The bailiffs froze, hands hovering over holsters. The jury gasped, one woman fainting into her seat with a soft, lifeless thud. But the hunger drowned out their terror, surging through me like a tidal wave of primal need, erasing the man and leaving only the beast, its coils twitching with anticipation. I lunged from the bench with a guttural roar that echoed off the walls like the cry of a damned soul, my body twisting into a monstrous hybrid, human torso melding into a coiling tail that shattered the wooden railing with a splintering crack, sending shards of oak flying like shrapnel into the flesh of the unwary. Screams erupted, a cacophony of panic that fueled my frenzy, each cry a note in a symphony of dread. The air filled with the acrid scent of fierce sweat and urine as spectators bolted for the exits, trampling one another in blind panic, bones crunching underfoot like brittle twigs. A heavy-set man tripped over a bench, his cry cut short as the crowd surged over him, leaving him a broken heap amid the chaos. Doors slammed, but the courtroom's heavy oak portals jammed under the press of bodies, trapping many inside like rats in a sinking ship. My tail lashed out instinctively, slamming into a bailiff who had drawn his gun. The impact sent him flying against the wall with a sickening crack, his body crumpling like a rag doll, blood smearing the paneling in dark, glistening streaks that dripped like tears from the portraits above. Another bailiff fired wildly, bullets ricocheting off my scales with metallic pings, leaving only superficial scratches that healed almost instantly, the flesh knitting with a wet, sucking sound. I ignored them, my focus locked on the witness stand. Clara Wheatley stared up at me, her face a mask of horror, mouth agape in a silent scream that stretched her features into something grotesque. She was the first, her lie still fresh in the air like ripening fruit, its sweetness masking the rot within. I seized her by the throat, my clawed hand lifting her effortlessly. Her feet dangled, kicking futilely as she gasped, her skin cold and clammy under my touch. "Please, no," she whimpered, but the words were laced with deception, sweet and intoxicating, like nectar laced with poison. My fangs sank in, piercing flesh with a wet puncture, injecting paralytic venom that burned through her veins like liquid fire, searing her from the inside out. She convulsed, eyes rolling back, her body arching in agony as veins bulged like twisted roots under her skin. Then the expulsion began, not words, but writhing, grotesque embodiments of her falsehood, slimy, tentacled things that slithered from her lips, pulsing with inky blackness. their tendrils lashing at the air with high-pitched squeals that grated like nails on bone, evoking the cries of tormented spirits. The courtroom devolved into chaos, a nightmarish pandemonium of flailing limbs and desperate pleas. More shots rang out, but I was a whirlwind of scales and fury, untouchable amid the storm. My tail swept across the jury box, scattering chairs and sending jurors scrambling, their faces contorted in primal terror. One man, a portly retiree, clutched his chest, collapsing in what might have been a heart attack amid the terror, his final gasp a wet rattle that hung in the air. I snatched one of the lie creatures from the floor, crunching it between my jaws. It burst like overripe fruit, tasting of ash and ecstasy. Bitter deceit mingled with the thrill of consumption, a dark nectar that sent shivers of forbidden pleasure through my veins. The energy surged through me, heightening my senses, making every scream a symphony of exquisite suffering. Next was Hale, the lawyer, that weasel of a man who had orchestrated so much of the farce. He tried to flee, darting toward the side door, his briefcase abandoned in his haste, papers scattering like dead leaves. But I was faster, my coils whipping out to ensnare his ankle with a fleshy slap. He fell with a yelp, face slamming into the floor, blood trickling from a split lip that mingled with the growing pools on the ground. "Your Honor, Harlan, what madness is this?" he babbled, but his words were poison, laced with years of perjury and manipulation, their falsity coiling around him like invisible chains. I hauled him close, my slit eyes locking onto his wide, terrified gaze, reflecting back the abyss of his own deceit. Another bite, fangs driving into his shoulder, venom flooding his system like acid through fragile veins. He retched violently, expelling his deceptions, coiled serpents of his own, miniature replicas of my form, biting at the air with tiny fangs that dripped with illusory venom. They slithered across the blood-slicked floor, hissing defiance, before I snatched them in my jaws, crunching down on their toxic forms. They tasted like charred secrets, nourishing the beast within, fueling my frenzy with a rush of intoxicating power. Hale's body went limp, his eyes glazing over as the lies drained from him, leaving a husk twitching on the ground, skin sallow and drawn as if aged a century in moments. The air was thick with the coppery stench of blood and the acrid burn of gunpowder, mingled with the sickly sweet decay of expelled lies. Bodies littered the floor, some trampled into unrecognizable pulp, others felled by my rampage, their eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. A few survivors huddled in corners, sobbing or praying in hushed, broken whispers, their truth laid bare in their terror, exposed like raw nerves. Officials who had survived the initial chaos fired desperate shots, but my scales deflected them like rain on stone, the impact sending ripples of pain that only sharpened my hunger. One bullet grazed my arm, drawing a thin line of ichor that sizzled on the floor like acid, filling the air with a foul sulfuric reek. The climax came with Vance himself. He cowered behind his defense table, overturned chairs forming a pathetic barricade that trembled under his fear. His facade had crumbled. The smirk was gone, replaced by raw fear that twisted his features into a grotesque parody of the man he once was, his suit disheveled, tie askew like a noose half-tied. He raised his hands in supplication. "Harlan, please, we can make a deal. More money, anything." But his voice was a symphony of lies, each word a thread in the tapestry of his crimes, weaving a web that now ensnared him. I towered over him, my coils encircling the table, splintering it with a squeeze that sent splinters embedding in his flesh like accusatory barbs. The courtroom was a slaughterhouse now, littered with twitching bodies and the husks of expelled lies, writhing remnants that dissolved into oily puddles, staining the floor with inky blackness that seemed to whisper faint, accusing echoes. I struck like lightning, fangs piercing his chest just above the heart, the puncture wet and intimate, like a lover's fatal kiss. Venom coursed through him, a torrent that forced out the core of his rot, a massive, throbbing mass of deceit, a writhing knot of embezzled souls and buried corpses that pulsed with malevolent life. It erupted from his mouth in a grotesque cascade, shadowy forms of the dead, spectral faces twisted in agony, intertwined with serpentine coils of falsified ledgers and blood money, their ethereal screams a chorus of the damned. In a snake-like frenzy, I devoured it whole, my coils wrapping around him as I tore into the perjurer's essence, flesh and lies mingling in my gullet like a blasphemous communion, a euphoric blend that blurred the lines between predator and judge. As I fed, reflections flooded my mind. Every bribe I'd taken, every verdict I'd twisted, mirrored in his crimes. A dark mirror that reflected my own monstrosity. Was this justice, or just the monster's feast? Righteous judgment dissolved into primal savagery, and for a moment I reveled in it, the power intoxicating, the hunger sated in a rush of dark bliss that left me hollow and yearning for more. But gluttony has its price. Exhaustion followed the glut, a bone-deep weariness that pulled at my limbs like invisible weights, dragging me toward oblivion. The transformation reversed as suddenly as it had begun, my scales retracting with a series of wet pops, skin knitting back over the beast like a wound scabbing over too quickly, leaving faint scars that itched with remembered pain. My tail segmented and reformed into legs, bones grinding painfully with the sound of stone on stone. I slumped against the remnants of the bench, human once more, clad in tattered robes that hung like funeral shrouds, reeking of blood and bile. The courtroom lay in ruins. Withered husks of the deceitful sprawled like discarded puppets, their lies consumed, leaving only empty shells drained of vitality. Skin stretched taut over bones as if mummified in an instant. Clara's body was a crumpled form on the stand, pallid and lifeless, her eyes milky with unspoken regrets. Hale lay nearby, mouth frozen in a rictus of horror, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, as if witnessing eternal judgment. Vance's body was a desiccated corpse, eyes vacant, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Chest caved in where I'd struck, ribs protruding like accusing fingers. Blood pooled in congealing puddles, mixing with the dissolving remnants of lies that bubbled faintly, releasing wisps of acrid vapor. The surviving officials, a handful of bailiffs and spectators, huddled in corners, whispering of demons and madness, their faces ashen, some weeping uncontrollably, their sanity fraying like threadbare cloth. I straightened my tie with trembling hands, slipping back into the facade of normalcy, my mind racing for an escape, a mistrial perhaps, blamed on a gas leak or mass hallucination. Anything to preserve the illusion before the sirens wailing in the distance arrived. But as I rose, a new itch stirred, not on my skin, but deeper in the recesses of my soul, an insidious gnawing that spread like rot through marrow. The curse was metastasizing, turning inward like a cancer, feeding on the host it had sustained. My own buried lies, the ritual's secrets, the bribes I'd hidden even from myself, the lives I'd ruined in my climb to power, began to writhe to life, coiling like serpents in my gut, their scales scraping against my insides. I felt them stirring, hungry, ready to erupt, their metallic tang rising in my throat like vomit laced with venom. Pain lanced through my abdomen, a preview of the agony to come, sharp and unrelenting, as if fangs were already sinking into my core. In this tainted world, even my truths were fragile illusions, destined to be consumed by the beast inside, leaving nothing but echoes of deceit. And as I gazed at the carnage, I realized the trial wasn't over. It had only just begun for me, a personal inquisition in the court of my own damnation. Staggering from the bench, I clutched my stomach as the first fissures appeared, not on my flesh, but within, invisible cracks in my very essence that spiderwebbed through my being. The survivors watched in mute horror as I doubled over, a hiss escaping my lips like steam from a grave. The lies inside me swelled, pushing against my ribs with grotesque pressure, demanding release, their forms twisting and bulging under my skin. In a final, desperate act, I clawed at my chest, nails drawing blood that tasted of my own corruption. But it was too late. The beast turned its fangs inward, devouring my deceptions from the core with ravenous glee. Agony exploded as the venom of self-truth flooded my veins, expelling my own monstrous secrets in a writhing mass that choked the air from my lungs, tendrils of shadows spilling from my mouth like the confessions of a dying man. I collapsed amid the ruins, my body convulsing as the curse claimed its ultimate victim, leaving only an empty husk where Judge Harlan once stood. A fitting verdict in the court of eternal deception, where even the judge must face the gallows of his own making.